Solve it. All right? Look up here. You have 2 minutes to solve it. You have to connect all the dots with 4 straight lines. Do not lift your pencil off the paper. Do not retrace any line. Lines may cross if necessary, but they shouldn't retrace. 2 minutes to solve it. So draw those 9 dots on your paper somewhere and solve this puzzle for me.
Oh, no, okay.
Draw them somewhere. Solve it for me. Connect all of the dots with 4 straight lines. 4 straight lines. I'm going to make you think for a minute. Four straight lines. Connect all those dots. Don't lift your pencil or pen.
Yeah, so you're trying to remember it. You're just about sideways.
I know you were straight.
Where we try to
No, you go way front this way, and come back this way. But you go back to this right, and you really hit one of these.
Keep you moving.
You can't lift your pencil and break it. How can you connect?
Yeah, okay. Well, when you do it.
Is it possible?
Yes.
Yeah. I already saw somebody who got it. Don't share it.
Yeah. I can't get exactly.
Aww. You're going to have an arrow if you do it the right way. An arrow. It kind of looks similar to an arrow.
Oh, well.
So I only gave you one clue on purpose. This is just making sure your brain is engaged a little. That looks like a Star Trek spaceship. Enterprise. So, what do you think? I'm going to say, I'm going to give you one clue. Here's your first line. Now solve it. Can you get it? No? Come on, I gave you a really cool clue. Nobody ever gave me a clue. I had to solve it all on myself. I want to know what this is. I like fidgets. That's awesome. Okay, anybody else get it yet? That's pretty too, but that's not right. But that's cool. You get it yet? So the next one?
I wasn't picking up on the subtlety there.
There you go. There's the second line. I lifted my pen because I quit writing. Sorry. So we're going to go this way. We're going to go up, and then we're going to go down.
We're actually mirrored.
Yeah.
Go back up.
So mine's a little off.
I just
too.
because
Oh,
Every week.
okay, I messed up. Sorry. My bad.
Now you know how Kate was
Yeah.
accident.
Okay, I did one too early. I was like, hey, I'm gonna have too many lines. Just pretend that one's not there. That's like all my geometry homework in school, I remember. Just ignore that line. So now what?
I bet the teacher loves
Just
that.
ignore
Oh, they
that
did, they get mad. So we're gonna go this way, that, and then I'm gonna come back here. Right? And then I'm gonna go. Right? And then I
Got
can
it, baby.
go
It's less
forever.
than 4.
And then it's an arrow.
3 and 1 hair.
So there's only 16 times ignore the other. Right?
Have it.
So if we do this, we start at the bottom, we go up, we come over, down, and up, and that's 4 moves. So there's a reason why we do that though. Oftentimes when we look at a problem, when we're working with our clients or students or whatever, we tend to have self-perceived limitations, right? So we need to make sure as we're working with whomever we're working with, that we work beyond the perceived boundaries that are set, right? Plus, it was fun to watch y'all do this. So, until I made my mistake, I'm sorry. But gosh, that was fun for y'all, right? So, when we look at this information, a lot of times we have the hidden rules of poverty. Look at some of this, just out of curiosity. If you come from the world of poverty, possessions are people, middle class are things, one-of-a-kind objects, legacies, pedigrees. That's what they call possessions, right? Money is to be spent in poverty, the middle class is to be managed, and wealth to be conserved or invested. How many of you invest your money in a whole lot of stuff? When I'm saying a whole lot, like you have $100,000 to invest in a gamble.
Yeah, it's me. It's gambling.
So let's look at food. On poverty, the key question is, did you have enough? And middle class, the key question is, did you like it? And wealth is, was it presented well? How many times do you focus on was it presented well? Okay. What about education? In poverty, they say it's valued and revered as abstract, but not as reality. Crucial for climbing success ladder and making money in the middle class, and necessary tradition for making and maintaining connections in the wealthy. Isn't that crazy? So, or love. Poverty is love and acceptance conditional based upon whether individual is liked. In the middle class, love and acceptance conditional and based largely upon achievement. And in wealth, love and acceptance conditional and related to social standing and connections. So we have a bunch of different ways that we see in these things. So that's from Ruby Payne. I encourage you to look at Frameworks for Understanding Poverty by Ruby Payne. So diversity in diversity. People from the same ethnic or racial group are also diverse among each other in terms of socioeconomic status, education, age, their orientation, their sexual orientation, individual experiences or disposition. You know, if you look at all, I have 3 brothers, and out of all 3, we're all very, very different. All 4 of us are very different. I tell my mom she saved the best for last because I'm the youngest. So my mom said, no, you were an oops. No. So when we think about that, I am completely, completely different than my brothers. And I'm very amazed at how different all of us were growing up. But, so we can look the same. All my brothers except my oldest. My oldest brother looks like my grandfather, but my other 2 brothers have red hair, the lighter complexion, and we look very much similar. There's no guessing that we're brothers. You know, and so when you think about that, within certain groups we have a lot of diversity as well. So, think about this. White students often struggle with strong feelings of guilt when they become aware of the pervasive racism. When they become aware. When do they become aware? When do you think? Even when they feel their own behavior has been non-discriminatory. Do you think, have you ever noticed how certain groups are treated? Has it ever affected the way you feel? I probably realized that when I was about 5th grade when I heard my grandfather use a word that really bothered me, and it started with an N. And I told my grandfather that he was not allowed to say that around me again. And it's like, who do you think you are? I said, I'm the one saying you can't say that anymore. Nobody talks like that anymore, you know? So when we think about it, a lot of what we see, we're not involved in, but we're associated with because of the way we look as well, right? So a lot of times, the service industry that we're a part of, the people we serve, assume that because other people that look like us did it, then we must have that same mindset, right? So therefore, we're attached to some of those issues or challenges. So don't ask people to get out of their comfort zone. We ask them to stretch their comfort zone. What does that mean? Because you can't give up everything you're comfortable with, but what does it mean to stretch your comfort zone?
Recognizing where you are, but being willing to go a little beyond that.
Okay.
Beyond it.
Right. Do you have to give up who you are to be able to stretch? No. And a lot of times when we think about diversity and culture, we think, oh, we can't have what our past was, or we can't be this, or we can't have this, or we can't hold on to this because it's no longer politically correct. I don't know that anybody is ever telling any of us you have to give all up over here in order to be this person over here. We embrace who we are, but we don't have this elitist mentality thinking that we, because we're this certain kind of person, are better than. Or the counterpart of that, because we're this type of person, we're not as good as the other. Does that make sense? I challenge you to think beyond your comfort zone, but don't give up what you're comfortable with. So the magic happens beyond your comfort zone, but you have to be aware of what your comfort zone is so you can explore outside of that circle, right? So challenge and support them to stretch their comfort zone. How does that apply to your kiddos that you're serving, or the families you're serving them? How would it apply to you and the families? If you just let them stay right in with their comfort zone at all times, what would happen? Think about it. You're looking at me like I'm speaking Greek. Sorry. Let's say we have a family who uses corporal punishment as the only way to deal with discipline. Are you going to let them continue that, even knowing that that's probably not the best approach?
We give them options.
How?
Some families would use, we have, it's love and logic,
Right, right.
talking about their logical consequences, there are other ways.
The natural consequences.
So there are other ways of looking at it.
Okay, so if they're not gonna clean up their room, or if they leave things on the floor, maybe you could just take them and put them in, put them in restriction, or,
There's some other options to look at.
yeah. So part of that is educating them without insulting them. And that's where I was talking about, we have to respect culture, we have to respect the diversity or the differences of what they are and who they are and what their experiences are. In order to empower us to serve them, we have to know where they're coming from, but also know how to guide them without insulting who they are, right?
Right.
And that's what I mean by that.
I think it's tricky too because of, like, in some instances where clients will come in and there's a certain prejudice a certain way, which is different from personal values. And so being respectful of who they are, but it's a tricky place to be. But then talking about, well, what about the, you put it as options always, but still, it's
Right.
hard when it raises things up in you.
Right.
When you work 3 generations not to use that word, right?
Mhm.
And yet that's the word that comes in right off the map, that kind of stuff.
Right. I think that's probably why one brother married an African-American lady and the other one married a Lebanese, because we did hear the counterpart of that, very inappropriate comments by certain people, and that in our internal home really struck a negative chord with us, because we
Right.
spoke a lot differently.
Right.
But when we think through this here, we have to be very cautious about what we say and do, but does that mean that we have to then accommodate and accept their choices as appropriate? Do we? Like, am I going to allow someone to handle their child through physical aggressive means? Or am I going to allow that person to scream and holler at the loudest they can at their kiddo? No. And we're going to educate them why that's not, but exactly what you said there, we're going to tell them some different choices they can make that are a lot more effective. And that's how, when I work with parents a lot of times, it's not this is wrong, It's like, so mom, when you do this, you get an immediate fix, but then they're going to repeat. Or do you want a long-term fix, and let me show you what's worked with my kiddo. And then we talk about it and we have those conversations, because a lot of the times when I work with parents, they have very much some of the experiences of what we were just talking about. So how can you help them understand is respect where they came from and understand why they did it, because they're repeating a cycle of what they experienced over and over, correct? So if we insult that, then we're insulting their mom, we're insulting their grandmother or whatever. So as we go through this, that's where we challenge them not to give up their comfort zone, but stretching their comfort zone, which causes us to stretch ours as well. Does that make sense? So, people who expand or stretch their comfort zones to include more people and experiences often report more complete, rewarding, and successful lives during college, during school, and beyond. Why? Why would they report that they're happier or more complete? We talked about earlier that if we are so certain about certain things, what do we do about other people's opinions? We shut them down and we only have this tunnel vision, right? If we're willing to step out of our comfort zone, then we're willing to explore other options, more open, and then what happens to the value of our life? One of the best things I ever did, you know, I was a great parent. I was probably the best parent ever until I had children. Because I could tell parents all the time, well, this is what you should do. And my son was proven wrong every time, because everything that would typically work does not work with our Ty. So, but that's okay. And I think that because it's caused me to really stretch my comfort zone, because we don't use corporal punishment, and we never have. But what are ways we can do it? Because, you know, I know, like with Hannah, my 14-year-old, Amy and I can say, this is what you need to do. Why? And we're able to tell her the reason why, and she's like, oh, okay. And Ty, it's no, but this is why you need to do it. No. He's a very typical boy in a lot of ways, so it's really forcing me to think different. So personally, me as a white male, non-disabled, middle-class heterosexual, I do know that in some ways what we're talking about applies to me, right? And that's not mine, but in equally important ways, the words are not just about me. It's society, it's culture, it's everything that we do is driven from a reason. So when we think about that, when we look at our identity development, the autonomous person is humanistic and involved in activism regarding many forms of oppression, fighting sexism, ageism, homophobia. So when we look through there, you have the ability to stand up for what you believe in, or you can be silent and let other people do things you know they shouldn't be. Correct? Whether you agree in somebody being homosexual or not, whether you agree that it's an innate hereditary thing or choice, that's not our business. What our business is loving people that we serve, right? One of my favorite sayings that I hear from Billy Graham, hopefully you know who that is, he says, it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict, God's job to judge, but it's my job to love. And I think as practitioners, we always have to remember, it's not our job to judge. It's not our job to preach. It's our job to love on and help them reach their personal potential and their maximum potential, right? So, understanding cultural difference doesn't make the difference go away. However, the person who understands how difference causes communication to break down can take the initiative to try and make the communication work. A lot of times the communication is not somebody's unwillingness to communicate, it's they don't know how. Went through a lot of that already. So we look at racial characteristics are only minor variations among people groups, right? Let's look at this. How many different races do we think we have in here? I don't know, we're a hodgepodge, right? But we all assimilated very well into this room, didn't we? We know the rules. We're able to honor certain things. We're able to be respectful. So, but the race in there didn't have, per se, a huge effect on your success in here. Racial characteristics such as your skin color, eye shape, hair texture account for only 0.012% of human biological variation. That's a pretty small amount, isn't it? So when we think about that, there is no scientific basis for race. Race was invented, per se, they started identifying it in the 18th century. Race and racism have always been connected. Racial traits are culturally determined. How? How are racial traits culturally determined? What do you think?
Power.
Okay?
I think typically like majority in a culture tends to have more power, and so they determine the traits of the other cultures.
Okay. I have a really good friend. They adopted a young girl. She was African American. They had her since day one. Okay, since she was born. She acts just like, and you know, they couldn't have children, so they wound up adopting. Next thing you know, they adopted, then they had a child less than a year later.
First,
So
yes.
all the time it happens. So when we look at that though, and I get to interact with them, and I watch the daughter, who's about 2 years older than the brother, they act very similar. And the young girl interacts, and predominantly their friend circle are Caucasian or white people, and their children are white, and this sweet little girl blends in with everyone else, talks the same way, plays the same games, has the same social things that they like. And the only thing that's really, really different is that she has a lot of melatonin compared to the others, right? However, if people don't know her, what are they going to think? They're going to think because she's that dark and because she's African American, they expect her to act a certain way. Would you agree? And that's what that means. So when we see this, the belief that a classification based on skin color and other skin deep properties like body shape or hairstyle maps or onto meaningful, important biological kinds is a pseudo-biological concept. There's no proof. Because we know if well, here's a prime example, M&M. And I'm not talking about the candy, okay? I mean, does he act like your stereotypical white man? No, but if they didn't see him and they were looking, they might assume something until he opens his mouth. So, when we look through that, science suggests the differences that set us apart are not racial, they are more likely to be cultural. And I want us to really focus on that because a lot of times even our own personal bias comes from an assumption that it's related to their to their race versus where they come from. I know in my home, our interactions are considerably different than what my brother and his family do. And that's not a bad thing, it's just the way they interact. They celebrate that Christmas is important, but they don't celebrate that Christmas is a holiday for them to receive gifts. They spend a lot of time in church and they spend a lot of time interacting, and it's very different than the way our family celebrates. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's considerably different than what most people assimilate with or associate with a Caucasian family, right? So everybody builds their culture, and most of that culture is driven from experiences of when they grew up or the new culture they create in their home. And then children's choices and their behaviors are associated with the culture that they're coming from, right? So, the only reason people think differences are major is because we've been brought up in a culture that has taught us to see differences this way, right? And I don't mean this in any rude way, but we would never have a TV that says Anglo-Caucasian table, entertainment, television, you know? We would never have white entertainment television, West, you know? We have black entertainment television, we have Latino stations, we have things that specifically are associated with certain ethnicities and races, and then they personally associate their culture into that race. Would you agree? So it's a societal thing where we are learning, and then we begin to internalize or make assumptions based upon what society is teaching us. Not what's real, but what we're being taught. And we need to know the difference, because one of the things that I think is critical for us in our profession is to teach people agency. You know what agency means? Ownership. They don't have to be driven by their past. Their past often, and you do any of the readings that Ruby Payne has written, she talks a lot about agency because a lot of times, especially when they're coming from a low socioeconomic background or a background of a lot of violence, they tend to repeat that or think that they're locked into that pattern, right? So in your approach to serving the families and serving the children, I encourage you to talk a lot about agency, which is you control your future. You decide where you walk. You decide where you go. I sat at a table similar to this one year when my parents had lost pretty much everything, and my dad said, we want you to go to college, but there's no way possible. Well, about that time, because my parents had 4 kids in 5 years. So we're all about the same in age. And that my parents told my brothers the same thing. Out of 4 boys, I'm the only one who went to college. And I went twice. They all had the same conversation. Does that make sense? But I had someone outside of my home who invested in me, invested time, and helped me realize that I had agency of my future. And I went to UT, and I was blessed enough to go to UT on a 75% scholarship. And it wasn't for basketball, I promise. So, or football. I was very blessed to apply myself academically. And I think 2 of my brothers were smarter than I was, or am. They just didn't apply themselves. And so when we look through that, we have to teach our students and our children and families that we're serving so that they can choose to make a difference in their path, right? And so we have to be aware of culture. We have to be able to recognize diversity, but we have to be able to teach the people we're serving that there's a significant difference between culture and their race. Because a lot of times even children associate culture with their race. Oh. So culture, we're talking about the iceberg. How is culture like an iceberg? When an iceberg is going in the water, I'm assuming probably none of you have really seen one. If you have, I want to see your pictures from your trip. But when we think about it, what do we see in an iceberg? Just what? The tip, right? So 9/10 of culture is out of conscious awareness. So this hidden part of culture has been termed deep culture because it's deeply hidden, right? So, as a group, I want you to think about this. We know the obvious things. I can see I have red hair. I can see I wear glasses. I can see I have big teeth. I can see that whatever I want to say. I can see it. It's obvious. I speak English. That's obvious because I heard it. I like to have fun because I laugh a lot. You can see that. Does that make sense? What you might not understand, or I might have insecurities about certain things because it makes me nervous, and most people can't tell it, but right before I start working with a group, I get incredibly nervous, right? And so I like to get there early enough to fix everything, so y'all being in here didn't help any today. Really? So that's something about me you don't know, right? So I know that even I've had the opportunity to preach in church. I have been what they call a supply pastor, so I go and I have substitute priest, or whatever you call it. I've been a youth pastor, and I've been a music minister, and all these things people would never guess because it's not overt, right? I know I like to run. You can't tell because I'm a little fluffy, but I like to run. I always tell people I'd be a lot fluffier if I didn't run. So I actually lost about 60 pounds, so I say fluffy, but I had to because I was getting where my ankles are bad. But people couldn't tell that. So when we think through that, I want you as your table group to come up with a list of things that you feel make up the 90% that we do not see. What is it about people that we should be aware of that we don't see? Okay? What is it that we have to be aware of in order to best serve them that is not going to just overtly be out there? Talk with your group and see what I'll come up with.
Family relationship.